Mark Murphy. Hello. Whoop, whoop. I got a little ahead of myself there. Yes, this is Mark Murphy, and this is traveltube.com. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to address something that and expand on it from a little clip I did about 2 or 3 episodes ago about that American tourist going to Canada because it dovetails with this whole issue around the drop in tourism to the United States, in particular from Canada, but we're seeing it from other spots around the world. And when you actually get to the reasons, it's not what the media is portraying, nor the article that I'm going to focus on today. So there's a coalition that came together called the Beyond Borders Tourism Coalition. There was an article written about it in early August. And I think it's a great effort. I think it's great that you're going to do a coalition. I think it's great that organizations are coming together to get the message out, why that people should come to the United States, why it's a great country, why they'll have a wonderful time. But the article, and I think some of the folks that were quoted and some of the folks maybe on this board are missing the forest for the trees. And I'm going to get into why I think that's the case. Then you can decide, because I'm going to take this article apart and then I'm going to show you what the real data shows and what is actually happening and what's driving this drop. And it's not going to be what the hyperbolic writer, and I assume some of the folks that were quoted, think it actually is. So let's get into it. So I'm not going to name the outlet or the author. I'm just going to get into where they're coming from. So the first thing the article talks about is an inventor who basically said, take all the politicians, throw them in the water, and nobody will miss them. But if you get rid of the scientists and the engineers, oh boy, civilization will collapse. And how travel companies will fit into that engineer and scientist bucket because they're trying to hold things together against, quote, attacks by politicians whose actions sometimes make them appear intent on tearing civilization down to the ground. Okay. Tearing civilization down to the ground. That's how we get started on the first paragraph. The article continues to talk about how these organizations coming together, it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented. Like, yeah, the travel industry, the associations and other groups, to a fault, sometimes they work too much in a silo, but they also work collectively. More hyperbolic statements. Yeah, that it's unprecedented that they got together. Not really, but according to this author, we are in unprecedented times. Unprecedented, because suddenly, without warning, they're seeing their businesses dry up because of political decisions made by one man. You know who that is? Orange Man bad, who doesn't appear to have a very good grip on how people are being affected by his tariffs. Huh? All right, we'll get to that, as well as a whole slew of other disruptive policies that came out of the blue. It's a lingering puzzle trying to figure out whom the Trump administration's disruptive policies are intended to benefit. All right, hit the brakes, dude. Out of the blue. Okay, if you follow politics at all and you know anything about this current president, he has said multiple times, going back over 4 decades, we may be at 5 decades at this point, about tariffs. I know in the 80s, he talked about tariffs. In the 90s, he talked about tariffs. 2000s, 2010, this guy's been talking about tariffs and actually implemented tariffs during his first administration. Ironically, the Biden administration continued those tariffs, and escalated some of those tariffs as well. Didn't hear jack from some of these folks. But with that said, who do these disruptive policies, who are they intended to benefit? Voters. The voters. Why do you think the popular vote went to this guy? Why do you think people that used to be aligned with the other party are now aligned with this party? Is it because this party today is more like the party of Clinton in the 1990s or the party of Kennedy in the early 60s? Could it possibly be that? I think you know. Because JFK couldn't get out of the primary today on the Democrat side of the party because his ideas would be too radical for them and too conservative. So, with that said, you have to ask yourself, have these people not been dialed into what's going on in America today? It doesn't appear to be the case because if you're trying to figure out who are these policies intended to benefit, the working class folks who have left the Democrat Party or plantation, whatever you want to call it. And the idea that in this story, the quote, we were given some vague notion that the purpose of these tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to America. Really? Question mark. Why should tourism businesses have to go down for that purpose? And how is all this supposed to bring back manufacturing? Okay, you can go look it up, but here's a little bit of a hint. Did you see in the Oval Office Tim Cook a couple of weeks ago where he increased the amount that Apple is going to spend in the United States to manufacture iPhones from 500 billion to 600 billion? Well, huh? What? And I hope I got my number right. Is it 500 million or is it 600 billion? Let's fact check me to Apple to invest 500 billion. Let's see. Yes, it's 500 billion. That's a B, folks, not an M. That's a B. So you've got a situation where the writer is making a claim that pretty much every network carried just Apple. So Apple's intending to invest $600 billion in manufacturing in the United States. So far, we have commitments for trillions of dollars. We'll see how that works out. But if you tell people if they build it here and employ American workers to build it, you pay no tariff. Or you can pay a 10, 15, 25%, or even higher. And that's called leverage. That's called negotiating. And that's what took place. So the idea that this person doesn't understand that is shocking to me, but not really. I'm just kidding. It's not shocking at all. I know this writer, and I don't think many journalists understand economics, and I don't think they understand finance, and I don't think they understand math. And this is just a great example. So now the question is bringing manufacturing into the United States bringing down the travel industry? Because he's focused on tariffs, but now he's saying it's not just tariffs as he continues on. And he talks about an America First and all these other things that are going on in terms of this disruption. But now he's talking about how what's going on right now is shaping up to be on a par with 9/11, COVID, in terms of the threats to business and how it's destroying business. And he says that it all stems from the whims of one man. And the whims change day to day. Okay. Did he miss the European Union signing that deal or agreeing to that deal just a few weeks ago on tariffs? Did he miss that? Because that happened before the article came out. The whole EU. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, yeah, the UK too. So I'm missing something. Canada's a holdout. Okay, cool. Canada's a holdout. But there's this thing called the USMCA, which means the vast majority, it's over 90% of goods because of the USMCA can continue to flow freely. Right? Now, if you're a dairy farmer in Wisconsin and you try to sell your cheese, your milk, et cetera, dairy products into Canada, you could be hit with a 300% tariff. Is that fair? Do we give them a 300% tariff selling? Yeah, no. So trying to balance trade out, we'll find out in time whether this long-term is the right policy, but doing nothing was not an option. Having no manufacturing base, not an option. And we don't. We're a service-based economy and a financial-based economy. And that means all that middle class has been hollowed out. So again, who voted for this? Yeah, that's the people that it's intended to benefit. And if travel takes a hit, and I'll tell you in a minute why it's not because of tariffs, and it's not because of Trump. There's a lot of factors that have impacted travelers from Canada. And we're going to get into specifics, which were readily available in a 2 or 3 minute search on the internet to find out what factors were impacting travel. I mean, ChatGPT, Perplexity, there's a lot of ways you can find out what's going on. And you still have to sift through, but you can still figure it out. But here's what I want to know. Where were all of you when the US, under the previous administration, had a COVID public health emergency kept in place until May of 2023? Where were all of you? You had 10 million people cross our border illegally, no vaccine, free hotel, free phones, etc., all on the taxpayer dime, adding trillions of dollars in debt to our country, which is hurting the purchasing power of Americans and creating a debt balloon that hopefully we're on the verge of knocking down. If the tariffs' initial revenue does not cause other things to happen, which we don't know at this point in time, nobody does. If you look at the revenue from tariffs, a month ago, we had a surplus. A month ago, not just the tariffs, overall budget surplus for the month. Now, there's a lot that changes and a lot that happens. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say that so far, the tariffs have generated what looks to be potentially over the course of 12 months, 3, 4, $500 billion in new revenue to this country. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, especially because the tariffs, if you want to stick with that and you think that's what's impacting travel, have been a drain on us selling products into other markets, despite us being the largest consumer market in the world. So people were selling all their stuff almost tax-free, tariff tax-free, and we were getting hit on the other side going out. And also, people, keep in mind that when you talk about tariffs and just the percentage of tariffs, there's another tariff that hits virtually every Western consumer. It's a VAT. It's a value-added tax. Or I think it's HST in Canada. So there are other layers on top. There's also barriers to entry in terms of IP, in terms of being able to do business in those places that are very restrictive for American companies. But again, this journalist has no clue. So think about this. You're in the travel industry. You're upset about this right now, a few months of disruption. I looked, I was trying to find these organizations screaming about these policies that forced people to be vaccinated in order to travel to the United States, but having an open border where 10 million people could come across the border, no health check, no vaccine, no worries. Where do you want to go? Oh, you want to go to New York? Hey, we'll fly you there on our dime. Where were you guys? Were you talking about it? Were you saying, please drop this emergency? This is crazy. Why is an emergency still in place? This is bad for travel and tourism. This is another barrier to entry. How many people that wanted to come here but weren't willing to get the jab? How many people stayed home? What about lockdowns? Lockdowns, in some cases, lasted well over a year. Well over a year. And you never knew whether or not, the beach would be open or the beach would be closed, because it's really dangerous to be outside on sand, breathing fresh air. Really dangerous. In some cases, that went on for over a year. How about the shelter in place? How about the National Guard shooting pellets at people on their front porch in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul? Where was the outcry then? Oh my God, authoritarian, bringing in the National Guard, locking people in their own homes, telling them they can't go out, putting in curfews. This was all going on. The travel industry didn't say jack, nothing. It was like, I was one of the only voices out there, and I got blocked. I got kicked off LinkedIn because, again, you let 10,000 people march down the street for a BLM protest in New York City, but the guy with the Italian restaurant can't open, or I can't go into a restaurant as a cancer patient. I was going to my appointment at Sloan Kettering, and in 21, I was in New York City, and overnighting there because I flew in from Colorado because I was visiting family. And I flew in for a day, had my appointment the next day, and flew out. I couldn't go to a restaurant. I had to stand outside a pizza parlor and get like a couple of slices because I didn't have my card. I wasn't able to show my papers. So it's remarkable to me. But you know, this is this is beyond ridiculous when I read this article because I don't recall any of these stories. I don't recall the travel industry going apeshit because inflation was in some cases 25-30% over the last administration. Like if you make it more expensive and wages don't keep up, that's less disposable income. What happens? What's travel? Oh yeah, that's a discretionary purchase. You don't have to travel unless you're traveling for work. So if your take home pay, because you're spending so much money on all these other things, is getting killed, then you don't have money left over to travel, and that could have an impact. But again, where were the articles? Where were the articles saying, stop flooding the market with money? Stop doing all these crazy, crazy things. You're making it impossible for us to keep up. You're killing the middle class. People like me, I was fortunate. Gallon of gas costs $5 or costs $3. Doesn't affect my life. Eggs cost $12 or $4. Doesn't affect my life. I'm lucky that way. I have relatives who aren't and who really felt the squeeze. So under that scenario, again, where was the outcry? Where were the articles? Okay. And when you talk about what businesses are up against, yeah, I agree. Businesses are up against, a bit of a tough wall, you know what I mean? But at the same time, facts matter. Facts matter. So we're going to get into the actual facts of why just possibly people in Canada might not come to the USA today. Look, what could it be? Could the media have anything to do with it? Well, let's look. So CBC, Canadian Broadcasting, okay, government owned. What's their coverage, Ben? What's their coverage? So now remember, you're a consumer in Canada, you're on Facebook, or you're a visitor to Canada, which exposed this, and you can't access things that have been shared with you because they're being blocked by the government of Canada. So if you're trying to find information, they can block it. Okay. But then you got the propaganda arm, which is the CBC. So what's been their ratio of coverage of the US and Trump's policies? Well, an estimate is that it falls between 70 and 80% negative, 70 to 80% negative, and 20 to 30% positive, or just neutral. So with that said, 20 to 30% positive or neutral. I'll bet you the positive stuff is under 5%. So the positive coverage that you see coming out of the CBC, and again, this is all readily available to any journalist that gives a shit about telling the truth. So positive coverage often highlights economic resilience or trade exemptions, but negative stories dominate, focusing on tariffs, threats, and diplomatic tensions. Okay, that's the CBC. But for the CBC, they're not out of line with how major networks in the US cover the current administration. So a study by the Media Research Center this year, from January to April of 2025, what was the percentage of positive or negative coverage? Okay. When it comes to the big three networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, 92.2% of the coverage, negative. Negative. Based on 899 stories running across their evening newscasts. So whether it's Doge, so tariffs, 93% negative. And it's interesting with tariffs. If you talk to the so-called experts when it comes to tariffs, they told you it was going to raise prices. It was going to cripple everything. You're going to immediately feel the impact. and so on and so forth. Well, what are we in? What are we in now? Like it was April 1st. Was that Liberation Day? I think they called it. So what's the, yes, it's been 4 months, right? 4 months. Yeah. 4 months inflation is actually under 3%, which is the target for the Fed. They want to get it down closer to 2. And you can look at it and you can see exactly where it's at. What's happened to wholesale egg prices, what's happened to gas prices, et cetera, down. Some things are down. Some things are continuing to go up just because that's how our economy is structured. That's why the Fed has a 2% inflation target, meaning all of your costs are going to go up 2% a year. According to the Fed, that's what they're targeting. And so when people say to me, he hasn't brought down prices yet. Yeah, guess what? Because the target inflation rate is to go up, not 25%, not 9 or 10% in a single year, but 2%. So yeah, things can continue to go up. And if they stop going up at 9, 10% a year, or 25 to, in some cases, 50, 60, 70%, depending on the product, in a 3.5-year time span under Biden, and you get it down to 2%, you've accomplished a lot. And we're there right now. So we're just above that number, but way down from where we were before. And interesting enough, when they covered tariffs, guess what percentage of the coverage was negative? 93%. How about DOGE? 97%. What about immigration? 93%. Wow. So think about that. Immigration. You let at least 10 million people into the country illegally. Just come on in. And not only can you come in and break our law to come in, we're going to reward you with free healthcare, free room and board. You know, we had to listen to people complain like they didn't like the food was not their ethnic food. Like, seriously? You're sucking on the government's teat, which is our taxpayer dollars. Not theirs, not the politicians, ours. We're paying for it. And they couldn't bring themselves to be anything positive when it comes to that. Anything. And the irony is, in this article that I've referenced, part of the argument was that the fear that people are going to get pulled off the street, even if they're citizens or tourists. Folks, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Just like when my nephew came here back in June and his girlfriend, who's from France and has a brother there, the girlfriend of the brother thought she might get taken to the prison in El Salvador and how terrifying it was. Well, where did she come up with that? Where did she come up with that thought that, holy shit, man, don't go. You could get kidnapped. You know, they're taking citizens off the street and they're deporting them. Never happened. Never happened. Can't happen. So it's so disingenuous what I'm reading here, because if you go to Grok, for instance, and you can go to all of them, Grok, Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT. I'm going to give you, and I use GPT and I used Grok. So we asked Grok about the general drop in travel from Canada to the USA. And here's what they said. Whoop, sorry about that. Here's what they said. This is Grok, not Mark Murphy. Many are choosing destinations that feel welcoming and offer better value, with 86% of the Canadians prioritizing affordability. Posts on X reflect this sentiment, with users citing Mexico, Europe, and domestic spots as preferred alternatives due to cost, safety, and political frustrations. Sorry, you're all frustrated up there. Really. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they're frustrated. Okay. Why are they frustrated? Why do they believe safety is an issue? Cost is an issue. And you'll find out in a minute that that's the biggest driver. But safety, well, how are they portraying the United States? Are they portraying it that it's a very safe destination? I'm here at the beach, Long Beach Island in New Jersey. Leave your doors open. No big deal. No one's coming in your house. No one, you're as safe as can be. Now, some of the inner cities, and by the way, who controls inner cities? What are some of the worst cities for crime and shootings? Chicago, who controls that? How many decades has Chicago been controlled by Democrats? How about New York? How good was New York under Giuliani? And even under, oh God, I'm spacing. The next guy, you know what I'm talking about. Now I sound like Biden. You know the deal. Bloomberg, sorry, little brain fart. It was great. And then what happened? De Blasio, followed by Adams. How's that worked out? What party are they affiliated with? So the oldest orange man bad nonsense, that doesn't get to the heart. Get to the truth. And FYI, I was anti-Trump. You can go back and read some of the stuff I wrote back in my day when I owned my publications before I sold them in 2019. I didn't think he was the last guy on the list that I thought would get elected. And I didn't like the retorts, like stop punching down, blah, 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 whatever. But at the same time, I like the policies because the policies are great. And today he's a lot more low key, which I prefer. Now, with that said, let's get into the real contribution factors for why, in particular, travel to Canada is down. And again, ChatGPT, Grok, or just a general search will bring back this data for you. So let's see. Cost of travel and exchange rate. I mentioned it before. When you have an exchange rate that at one point was on parity with the US dollar, Canadian dollar, and today it's 70 to 72, 74 cents. It fluctuates, but it's in the low 70-cent range. Oh, by the way, back in December 2024, it dropped to almost 50 cents to the dollar, Canadian dollar to the US dollar. So you would have needed 2 Canadian dollars to buy 1 US dollar. At the same time, what happened with the cost of travel in the US? Went through the roof. I can attest to that because I go back and forth to Florida from Jersey and I stay in hotels. When you get a Hampton Inn quoting $225 a night to pull off the road off of 95 somewhere in freak North Carolina, where you got like a truck stop, a place to lay your head or whatever, and it's $225, and then they want another $75 because you got a dog, and you're spending $300 to stay at a Hampton Inn off the highway. Just imagine what a nice resort costs in the U.S. Get crazy. How expensive did hotel rooms and food cost in Vegas? Maybe that's why Vegas is down. They've had a big boom, and now they're getting a little bit of a bust. And so the question becomes, did you get used to charging ridiculous rates for something that was half the price 6 years ago? Or, did you just adopt that and say, like, that's going to go on forever? It never does. It never does. Because at some point in time, you got to bring the prices down to bring the people back, because you've basically made it impossible for people to afford getaways there. And maybe that's part of why you're getting hit. Or are conventions choosing other places, or has the convention market been upended by, the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the COVID stuff that, again, politicians around the world, especially Western politicians, really embraced? Like, let's just keep everybody home. Again, where was all the outcry? I didn't hear anything. I felt like I was on an island screaming at the top of my lungs, trying to get people to wake up, because if you can have 10,000 people march down Fifth Avenue, but the little guy down the street can't open his restaurant, and people like me can't go into a restaurant when they did open. What does that do to travel and tourism? Case in point, I've got a really nice gift card to a really great restaurant in New York City. And I had to be in New York City last month for a follow-up, now I'm on every 2 years where they check on me, make sure everything's good, et cetera, because I've been, completely cured of my cancer. Thank God, knock on wood. The big guy upstairs, he's the man. And I was there. Did I stick around and take advantage of that gift card? Nope. Do I have any interest in going and spending time in New York? Nope. Why is that? It's dirty. It was overrun by homeless people, overrun by illegal immigrants. You've had things happening in, city centers that, But there's a whole country outside of the city centers that adopted all of this craziness and forgot about the people living there, the actual citizens. But with that said, you look at costs went through the roof after COVID because you had revenge travel and then that continued on. But now there's a reset. So if you budgeted that the gravy train was going to stay going forever, you obviously did not mind your P's and Q's, as they say, in terms of managing your business. So let's go back up to Canada. So what happened? Cost of travel and exchange rate. So I just covered the cost of travel. I touched on the exchange rate. And you know what they say? They say these are the primary drivers, likely accounting for, get ready, 50 to 60% of the decline in travel from Canada to the US. 50 to 60%. High US costs, weak dollar, Canadian dollar to the US dollar, even though the US dollar softened a bit this year. And they say that's 50 to 60% of the drop. Also, when you have tariffs by the cross-border traffic, like a lot of times Canadians come across the border to shop, and those are way down because in part tariffs on beer and other stuff that Canada has imposed on bringing those imports back. So now the Canadians aren't coming across to get a better value on beer and alcohol and other things that they usually like to come across the border and buy and then bring back to Canada because the Canadian government has imposed these tariffs on those US goods. So where's the blame, folks, for the cross-border driving traffic? Think about that. Just think about that. Now, the other thing they don't talk about is what's the tax burden in Canada? What's the standard of living in Canada and how has it been doing? Okay. The tax burden, which is massive in Canada. Okay. Massive. I had a business up there, so I know a little bit about the tax burden. Everybody talks about, oh, we got free healthcare, free healthcare. You don't have free anything. You're paying at the margin 50+% in places like if you live in Toronto on your income tax at a very low threshold. So according to, in this case, ChatGPT, the tax burden and stagnant wages, they contribute on top of the 50 to 60%, which involves the exchange rate and the cost of travel in the US going through the roof. Yeah, 30 to 40%. 30 to 40% of the factor going into why travel is down, they put at the feet of the tax burden and stagnant wages in Canada. Not me. Canadians, Canadian politicians. And if you live in Canada, you know what I'm talking about. Now, TD did a survey. Let me just pull this up here. They did a survey and they noted that 64%, okay, again, why is travel to the US down? TD, a Canadian company, did a survey of Canadians that are connected to TD, meaning they do their banking there. And they said that 64% of Canadians, according to their survey, plan domestic travel due to economic constraints. Economic constraints, folks. And then the thing that the story's about, we get to the political sentiment and boycotts. All right. They say, according to ChatGPT, the sentiment amplifies the economic factors contributing 10 to 20% to the decline. And here's the conclusion. I'm going to read it verbatim. The high cost of US travel, driven by a poor exchange rate and tariffs, is the dominant factor in the 2025 drop in Canadian travel, exacerbated by Canada's high tax burden and stagnant wages, which limit financial flexibility. You got it now? So 50 to 60% is the exchange rate. And what? Cost of travel. Cost of travel. Because what? Well, I just gave you an example. North Carolina, it's going to cost me $300 to pull over and sleep for 7 hours to continue my trip to Florida the next day for a Hampton Inn. If I wanted to stay at a nicer place, a lot more. So if you can go and spend 500 days as a couple, $500 per day as a couple, and stay at a four-star all-inclusive resort in Mexico and buy a package from one of the operators in Canada, why would you come to the US? The value difference is like this. And when you're getting crushed financially and your disposable income is getting crushed and you still have a little bit of disposable income to travel, well, I think we have currently one all-inclusive in the United States, and it's probably $1,000 a day. So you got that. It's down in the Keys. Forget the name. It burned down at one point. They rebuilt it, and I haven't priced it in a while, so I'm just throwing a number out there. But it's a lot more than doing an all-inclusive in Mexico, and you all know that. So yeah, Mexico has picked up business, and other places have picked up business. I was in Portugal a few years back. After you paid for the airfare, dirt cheap, really cheap to eat out. Lisbon's a great little city. They got beaches, it's a beautiful country. Go there because you'll save a ton of money. But maybe you don't want to go to Portugal. Maybe you don't like the time difference. I don't know. But I got to tell you, dollar, value for the dollar plays a huge role. And when you've got hotels where they estimate that 20% of the inventory in New York City was pulled out, and you want to go to New York City and spend a couple of nights there, and you're not concerned about your safety or anything else because you're going to stay in other areas, and it's really wrong place, wrong time when it comes to crime in New York City, and staying out of certain areas, obviously, just like you would in Toronto and other places where gangs are present, et cetera. Then you look at that and you say, oh, we can stay at the Holiday Inn, over off of 9th or 10th Avenue, near a Hell's Kitchen, and you go, it's $800 a night. And then the city of New York adds another 20% in taxes on top of that for a Holiday Inn. Why? What happened? Oh yeah, the open border, free hotel rooms, hotel owners, the hotel owners are thrilled because they've sold out their hotel for the next 2 years, some cases 3-4 years, and they're making bank. They never ran at 100% occupancy year round. Now they do. They never had guaranteed payments from the government without taking out transaction fees, right? Like, think about it. Like, I don't have to pay credit card transaction fees. Great. I'm getting paid by the government that's backed by the tax dollars. Even better. It's like owning Section 8 housing and knowing that every month you're going to get your check. You're going to get your check every month. You don't have to worry about, oh, I don't have the money, I lost my job. No, the government's paying for it. So yeah, they were pretty happy, but the other people that wanted to go to New York were paying a massive premium. To bring it all full circle, and I hope you get this, there are a lot of factors that go into what's impacting travel. And to try to pretend that it's something that it's not, which is, it's the tariffs, which is what this story led with, is just poor journalism, sloppy journalism, and wanting to basically push a political narrative as opposed to a reality check that I don't see many people in the travel industry owning up to. I just don't, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it's right there in front of you. This is what we're dealing with. These are the facts. Yes. Do they have an impact? Yes. Does the hyperbolic, do hyperbolic statements coming out of the White House piss people off? Yeah. But there's 330 million people in the United States, folks. It's a big country. When I traveled around the country during COVID, I traveled, I don't know, something like thousands, like maybe 8 to 10,000 miles during that period of time. I traveled all over the country. And there were states I went to that were basically locked down. And there were states that I went to where and this is 2020, folks, no vaccine, none of this stuff, right? And there were states I went to where it was business as usual. And all you have to do is look at what happened in Florida, where we opened up in Florida. There was a mass rush of people coming in. Tourism has boomed in Florida ever since. It's still booming in Florida. And you go, well, why did Florida do so well and some other places not so well during that time frame? And it's because we opened up. We let people make their own decisions. If you wanted to come. If you don't. But at the same time, that decision, which benefited anybody who had a brain that could look at what was being stated about the risk of COVID. And again, I'll just go back. They're telling you to stay in your house. Don't leave. It's not safe for you to see grandma. I can't get married. I can't go to a wedding. I can't go to a funeral. I can't see my relatives because it's too dangerous. I can only gather with so many people, in my own home. Otherwise, I could get cited. And we saw what you did in Canada. All of those things are going on. And the media, again, back to the media, was ignoring the BLM protests and everybody marching arm in arm, screaming at the top of their lungs, and not calling that out and saying, how does that make sense? Or the 1,200 healthcare workers that signed a petition saying, drop all mandates, drop all masks, drop all social distancing so they can march. While over here, I can't open my business. I can't travel. I got a shelter in place. Does that make any sense? It doesn't, and it never has. And that's really a shame. But the problem you run into with the media, and I'm going to pull this up, and I'm just going to play this clip. This is just one guy comes to the U.S. from the U.K., and he gives you his take. And there's a lot of these videos out there because people hear one story from their media, and then they ignore that, or they, with trepidation, say, oh, you know what? Like, they tell me it's dangerous. They tell me it's not a good place. They tell me the people are not good people. And then they come and they have a revelation. And thank God some are sharing it. And here's one of them.
Different from the reality. And what I mean by that is, while I was growing up, all I ever saw in the UK, the media coverage of the US was always bad, saying that the people are rude, that it's not a nice place to go, that it's dangerous. And all of that stuff could not be further from the truth. There was not one time that I felt unsafe in America in a whole 6 weeks, a whole 6 week span of being there. Everybody I met was friendly. Everybody I met wanted to have a nice chat. The scenery, don't even get me started on how ridiculously beautiful America.
Okay, folks. And maybe some of my wife's relatives in the UK can absorb that, because, yeah, some of you, cuckoo, you're not getting it, are you? But people that do travel here, they do get it. People that want to make excuses for the drop in travel, then, that's on them. That's on you. Don't make excuses. You have to adapt. Things are always changing in travel. And the fact that we have a president that is doing everything he can to end wars that are probably the biggest disruptor for travel, wars, is pretty remarkable. Look at how quiet the Middle East is right now. It's quiet. It was crazy under the past administration. We're finally saying in Ukraine and Russia, let's get them to the table. Let's get this resolved. That'll be amazing. 5 other places, whether it's Cambodia and Thailand, wars that have been raging in some cases for decades, done. Yet that's not good. I'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching. Please follow me and TravelTube, not me. Just follow TravelTube.com on your favorite podcast apps. Come to the site, TravelTube.com. You'll find some destination videos and content there. And appreciate you watching and would love your feedback. Thanks.